A little reference back to what I was talking about last week, that everyone is required to have an enemy. Everyone, everything. It still falls within the framework of there being three muses, three possibilities, three forces. But a little more about the enemy. And this gets very peculiar if you can hear me. You had a week, and one who listened last time, to truly consider the fact that whatever goes on, there's always the requirement that there be some kind of enemy involved. Whether it seems to be your personal affairs, whether it seems to be business, trying to expand your commercial endeavors. But now let me point out something that's almost peculiar. Men ordinarily wired up to apparently seek and to apparently identify, or they want to identify, the foe on this basis. It used to be called, in more bucolic areas, they had a name for this. It's known as "Lest You and Him Fight." And that's a good old game that some good old boys used to play in bars. And some good old boys, in fact, correctly identified some good old girls are sometimes getting involved with that. There's like one person is instigating, but instead of this person getting involved, he ends up with like two strangers, and he suddenly has them at each other's throat. That's called, "Hey, let's you and him fight." All right, here's the way it goes. It's almost as though ordinary people are seeking a kind of stand-in. It's almost as though, those of you that can follow the way I talk of late, of me suggesting, giving you rhetorical questions, rather than just stating outright and coloring in all the little blanks for you. It's almost as though that ordinary people are seeking a stand-in for themselves. This is directly connected with the area I keep bringing up to you and pointing out different possibilities and trying to get you to see it from different angles. This area of people apparently requiring external sources of authority, that no one seems to know anything, and those that seem to know the most, from one viewpoint, one quite valid viewpoint, seem to be those who can quote the most external sources. So, lest you and him fight ends up such as this, that someone makes a statement, their beliefs, and they say, wait, hey, don't get mad at me, it said that in the Bible. I didn't say that, I'm quoting that. It is not that people can get away with not having an enemy, but over a large area of time and space, ordinary people are into this unrecognized, almost scenario of, I know that I've got enemies. I know I've got to have enemies. Everybody has foes. But instead of me directly confronting it, let's you and him, and by him it can be the Bible, it can be some set of beliefs, it could be a political party, it could be an economic theory, it could be, hey, last night I heard on television that more Democrats are on welfare, more registered Democrats than Republicans. And somebody at a bar say, you can't say that, my mother's a Republican. The guy said, hey, talk to Dan Rather. They're the ones that reported, I'm just telling you. But the reality of the situation is, there is still a confrontation of sorts. There is still someone being in the situation that they have an enemy right then. They have opposition. But it's almost as though, remember, I'm just talking casual about rubbing your face into the reality of it, but it's almost as though life has let humanity arrange things to where they do not have to directly, not continually, directly confront a possible foe. And everyone ends up to varying degrees. Lest you and my mother fight. Lest you and what my forefathers' religion taught me fight. Lest you and Dan Rather fight. Lest you and the Kinsey Report fight. But leave me out of it. I'm just quoting. I'm telling you what I heard. I'm telling you what somebody told me. I'm telling you not as a direct participant in a confrontation with you. It's almost as though we have set up some sort of menage a trois, and I verbalize about it, but hey, I ain't getting in bed with you two. I can talk about it, but count me out. If you attempted, as some sort of personal undertaking, to look for this, I didn't think up many examples before I walked out here tonight, but you could find them in almost everything that you do, assuming that you did get something from last week of understanding that everyone requires a foe. Not just long-range foes, but even small-term foes of trying to go in and buy something at a store. And this foe situation, of course, does not necessarily result in you and a salesperson down, wrestling in the floor, hitting each other. But it's this kind of tension I've spoken about before. It's the necessity for anything to exist, even at the ordinary level of consciousness, that there has to be what appears to be opposing forces, opposing motivations, differing desires between two people, two groups of people, but on the lowest level, between two people for anything to occur. Without that, it's almost a non-event. It's the sorts of things that can happen to a person and someone asks them a few minutes later, a few seconds later, what just happened between you and that person that stopped you down on aisle 17 and talked to you? And you don't know. It was 5 seconds ago. It happened. You know that somebody walked up to you. That woman, yeah, you're right. I think it's a woman in the purple dress. Jesus. She asked me something, and you don't even remember. You know that something happened, but it's almost a non-event. You've got to understand, to some degree, you've got to begin to see that everybody from short term, which is almost of no consequence, you might say, of an apparent foe arrangement between you and somebody that takes place over a period of 2 or 3 minutes. Between that and what seems to be continuing long-range foes between you and everybody. Once you see that that is in place, it has a quite valid and real, if I may make such a comparison, which I will, what would amount to an absolute physiological basis for it when you moved up in time and space and size into the body of life itself, the very things that make the organism in us work, the organism we are, those kinds of apparently physiological forces fit into what I'm telling you. Blood would not flow unless it had a foe. Your lungs would not bring in the needed oxygen to enrich the blood and to clean out the system and to etc., did it not have a foe. There has to be an opposing force to it. Although many people might readily be able to see that, it is just as easy if you belong in this to see that there is an absolute parallel between everything that people attempt to do, all the way from attempting to worship some kind of religious deity to attempting to get somewhere in life, attempting to carry on an interpersonal relationship with someone. There has to be a foe there. If you can get a continuing awareness of this fact, then you can see in almost every circumstance the reality of what I'm saying, that it's almost as though that you and everyone else are trying to in some way weasel out and damn near succeeding on this level, the way it can be described, the way it can be spoken of. That I am not necessarily in conflict. I am not necessarily directly at loggerheads with this person or that philosophy or that group. That I've almost got it arranged. Nobody ever realizes it, but it's almost arranged that I am in it, if the truth be known. But it appears to be, hey, let's you and them fight. Don't blame me. The Quran said that. But apparently you believe it, whether it be the Quran or the Bible or what Guru so-and-so said. You state it, and then your apparent, at least transient foe, if nothing else, stands up and says, where did you get such a spurious idea? That's dumb. I don't even like that. That's offensive. You say, wait a minute. No. Don't take it out on me. Right there, God said it. It's quoted right there. Let's you and him argue about it. There is much more to this that I'm going to continue with tonight. But you can find this almost every place you look. Well, I don't hear enough amen, so I won't leave as quickly as I intended to. All right, brothers and sisters, how about this? How about the wide, wonderful world of excuses? Of all stripes, all polka dots, all hues, even polyester excuses. What is an excuse? It is a form of, hey, don't blame me. Let you and somebody else argue this out. The person is accused, why do you always do so-and-so? Here it is, we have been living together for 2 years, and I've told you over and over, I can't stand it when you do this. I'm tempted to pack my clothes and leave. Oh, please don't. I know you told me. I don't know. My father used to tell me about that, and for some reason, it's like now it's compulsive behavior. Unconsciously, I subconsciously continue to want to do this, and I know it's not your fault, and I know you told me you're suffering over it. Do you hear it? It's, hey, let's you and my father argue about that. I'm blameless. And this is not, again, I point out, in the world, as ordinary people call it, of psychology. This is molecular. This is blood-based, this is DNA-based, it's dependent upon oxygen moving through the blood, it's dependent upon all the firings of the nervous system. It is not some kind of psychological weakness or eccentricity on anybody's part. It is as real as coughing or being nearsighted or having heartburn. It's less you, that is, your apparent at the time foe, lets you and somebody else hash this out. But note, I've made this clear enough, I believe, in words. It's as though you and another person suddenly are getting up to do the foe dance. And you go blah, 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 and they go da, 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 and then it's suddenly as though you step back and say, may I present my father? May I present Freud, what he said? May I present my grandmother? May I present my father's religion? May I present what happened to me one time that you wouldn't believe? It's all lest you and him fight. There's no way that humanity, individually, speaking in general, or collectively, can avoid the situation of the requirement of there being a foe. But what is life up to? Seems a few more of you begin to catch a glimpse of something. What is life actually doing on a quite specific, physiological basis, as opposed to the imaginary world of psychological man? What is it up to, since the situation is already arranged that everyone must have a foe, that all situations must have opposition to stay alive? But then for it to be that in general, the humans involved continue to play somebody be my stand-in. They continue to operate on the basis of, hey, there's going to be a fight here. There's going to be pushing and shoving. Let's you and my father, let's you and him fight. You and him push and shove. If it were not that situation, you'd look in the dictionary, down in the E's, get down toward the bottom of the E section where it's EX, and you'd keep looking for excuse, for it to be there and your picture next to it as an example, and you'd get down there and there would be no word excuse. None. Because all situations wherein there must be the appearance of a foe, and there is the appearance of a foe, and you and the person, whether it be for split seconds, split weeks, split months, split years, you and the person would be at it, but you would do it with no reference to external sources. You would do it with none of the game. You and him fight it out. You would have no excuse. Those of you that still have some fear, I must admit, or I suggest to you, you might have less and less to say of any consequence, too. Once you realize that this fight, this struggle, this pleasingly balanced, growing opposition in which we're all involved, once you see it, once you can undergo a series of alterations in your own system, what appears to be confrontation, what appears to be a continuing process of you against somebody else becomes irrelevant. That is, it becomes irrelevant on the basis that people are opposing me, because that is not what's happening. If you needed any other way in which to look at it, you could take it as being a continuing self-diagnosis of your health. That is, am I alive, or have I died in the dead people dream? I could be dreaming all this. All you've got to do is realize somebody apparently is your foe. Somebody, something, some institution, some whole sway of human attitude. Do you have the feeling of opposition, being put upon? If you do, look no further. You do not have to go to a chiropractor. You don't have to call Gene Dixon. You're alive. So, if nothing else, you can use that as a continuing test. You don't need this, and you don't need to take your blood pressure or to look in the mirror. Is there the apparent situation of me having foes? If so, I'm alive. But it's no longer a matter, once you see it, of there being foes. Then the reality that is spoken of in much religion and much would-be mystical systems, and as I continue to point out to you in various ways, much of that then simply is your reality, not theoretical. Your system then no longer responds in the ordinary way to what appears to be the requirement of everyone continuing to have a foe. To you is life. Were it not for the foe of atmospheric pressure, my lungs wouldn't work and I'd be dead. So you could look upon atmospheric pressure as being a burden. If we didn't have it, I'd feel lighter. You wouldn't have to keep cutting down on the donuts. You could look at it as being an imposition, if you were so inclined. if you're wired up to be that dumb. It is simply, it's got to be there or the lungs wouldn't work. If you're alive to some degree continually, I'm going to say this again, it's not really true. Once it changes for you, it's not really true anymore. But there seems to be, to everyone right now, Christian, Jew, Buddhist, male, female, young, old, that there is, and always has been, a continuing string of impositions, to say the very least. People opposing you. There's always some shit. I mean, you go to Kmart and try to take something back, and they unconditionally guarantee it. You know, there's a good chance after you take back 8 or 10 things in a week's time that somebody's going to pop up there and say, how come you never have a bill of sale? It's always something. Or to look back at the opposition your family gave you. As much as you wanted to be a singing troubadour, for years your mother and father went, Jesus, you're terrible. They wouldn't encourage you. They tell you should get a job, you should go into school. It's always been something. And it's not funny. Not when you're in the midst of it, of course. But the kinds of things that the so-called religions and the so-called religious prophets have always talked about, and I've tried to put into less ancient, hoary, mystical, psychological, spiritual terms, the very things that they talked about, I have tried to just point out to you that nothing is broken. Evil forces are not afoot. Life is not dying. Humanity is not dying. Humanity is not about to destroy the planet. Humanity is not about to destroy itself. Humanity is not about to destroy life's own body. It's not about to do away with the life of life itself. And thousands of years it was described other ways. That some people, if they could get right with the gods would relieve them of some of the impositions of being alive, either now or later. Or in some cases, they might give these few individuals flashes of some kind of great insight wherein, who knows what. They seem to go through this and come out of it and go, hey, everything's okay. And they waddle off down the highway whistling. They can't tell you why. And it turns into more and more myths. In some way, they can see how evil and someday will be paid back. Someday, all of these forces that are conflicting with the good and righteous and proper behavior, these old pretzels, some way, they'll all be straightened out and they'll turn in to something straight and narrow and easy to comprehend. The kinds of changes they have talked about are quite real. They are just as physically real as anything else, and it has to do with the blood. I mentioned that. AMV12. It has to do with activating parts of the brain itself that are not now used. It's everything that the mystics have always talked about, but there are a series of absolute shocks that happen to a few people. I've never predicted, I've never promised to anybody in here who might undergo it, how long it would take, how many series of possible shocks there are. But alterations happen wherein it's not theory. It's not any talk about such and such. It's the kinds of things that you've always heard about and I've talked about that sound as though, to the ordinary wired-up personality and the wired-up circuitry, it sounds like, gee, that'd be great. You mean you could get to the point that, the religions always say that you love everybody. I took a different approach and I said that you would no longer hate anybody. But many ordinarily wired-up people, many, all over life's little body, go, wow, that would be great if that was possible. It is possible. And it's not through some flash of insight. It is not through hearing me comment, preach, me or anyone else. It's always matter of pointing as a kind of trickery, but when it happens, it actually happens to your system. It actually happens wherein it would be as though you're addicted. Another crude example, let's say you're addicted to some drug, some hard drug, and really addicted, and you had to take it every day, and it seemed to be great fun. And then maybe it wasn't such great fun. And then it was fun sometimes, and then it wasn't fun. And then it got to be less fun than it was fun. Crude example, but this is getting closer. You wouldn't have to check in the Betty Ford clinic. You wouldn't have to call the cocaine hotline. You wouldn't have to go cold turkey. Drawing this comparison between that and such things as not hating people, not being involved with the general flow of hostility, it would be as though one day you got up and you just had absolutely no interest in the drug. You didn't try to stop. You didn't go to a clinic. You didn't read a book. You did not tell yourself, boy, I got to stop this. Now, you may have been telling yourself that. You and the partnership may have been talking about it for months or years. It is as though you get up one day, maybe you look over and there are the drugs, or the partnership, as soon as you get up, says something about it, and you have just physically, is the way you would describe it now, you physically have just lost all interest. There is no speculation. You and the partnership don't go through any kind of discussion about it. You just lost all taste for it, to say the very least. That is not an unfair parallel. To what takes place inside the system, because it is not theoretical. And I am acutely aware, as we would all surely suspect, that that is not the condition of everyone hearing me now, seeing this at some other time on tape. But just hearing me or someone talk, or if you just reading a book, or if you following some system, the reality of it is not to be found somewhere along the line to say, well, it all sounds good and nothing has happened to me. And I've memorized all the books. I've memorized the religious canons of this outfit. That is true. Just a yellow circuit familiarity with new territory will not take a person there. But when it does happen, it is beyond any description of theoretical. It is beyond any limitations of, I have adopted this policy. I am now trying to live by this. It is an absolute series of changes that take place to what you would call now physical as opposed to mental, as opposed to spiritual. Of course, I keep trying to beat you with 2x4s, and most of you can see it, you just forget it, that all I'm pointing out to you now is that today, the eons of days that life had a purpose, that you should be able to see to some degree, of having humans talk about how the yellow circuit think as though it was separate from this, that day is diminishing at a very rapid rate. No kinds of questions of what's the difference between one's brain and one's mind. It's getting close to going somewhere new. I'm talking about in the ordinary world. That the brain is just as physical as the spleen is. And the feelings that life has instilled in man for all these years, that the mind itself is not just unique, it is spiritually unique. But in the past, it's all been mixed up in a blender and comes out at various times and places as speaking of man's spirit, his soul. And they're talking about the yellow fucking circuit. But still on the basis that the uniqueness of man is whatever they called it, the soul. And of course the soul, as your forefathers believed, if your forefathers was part of that herd, the soul is not part of the body. You can't find the body, you can dissect all the cadavers you want to, and you don't find the soul. Which of course, from one viewpoint, proves how mystical it is. man's spirit, they try to describe, there's been over and over throughout the years, describing man as a 3-part being, as a 4-part being, as a 7.5-part being. That man is physical, man is mental, man is emotional, man is passionate, man is hungry, and man is spiritual. And they get into the spiritual and the soul and all that, and of course nobody can find it. But I have told you quite directly, and all of you should be able to see this on a good and warm day, the uniqueness has always been one thing, the yellow circuit, what everybody's been calling the mind, the brain, consciousness. But it is no way separate from the workings of the total organism. Therefore, that which has always gone under the terms of metaphysical or mystical experience is no more mystical in a sense than having a nervous breakdown or a hernia or having your liver turn on you, of having terminal indigestion. I just picked out, of course, negative things, elicited a little laugh. But that which would apparently be a mystical experience, other than these kind of accidental things I referred to. The real change in oneself is as real as though you had, for some unaccountable reason, after years of being addicted to a drug, just got over it. Just lost interest, nothing else to say, nothing to talk about, in a sense, no effort. You didn't get up and say, I'm going to do it or die. You just got up and you lost all interest. No taste for it. There's nothing else to say. That is the reality of a mystical experience when it is a change in one's nervous system, when it is a permanent change, which is the only thing that I am interested in this. If I was interested in anything else, I'd be slapping you people around and giving you mystical experiences. But, you know, those are everywhere. You can find those anywhere. About change. See if this is subtle enough. I tried a hit and run on this several weeks ago, and most of you didn't even notice that I hit anything. So I'll try it again with a slightly different vehicle. Whereas in humans, the apparent desire for change is always preceded by thoughts of action, the actions to be changed are not. You could say this. The change equals thoughts of action. Let's just call it habits, that which someone feels as though they should change. And I mean habits in the widest sense of the word, behavior. Every feeling that an ordinary person has that they should change something that they do, that I should change. In general, I should change something specifically. The desire, the motivation, the way the energy flows through humanity to change is always preceded by, it is predicated on, thoughts of change. That is, thoughts of action as opposed to action. Those who have last year heard that I spoke about for a while, that there are only two possibilities for humans. That's to act or to think about acting. That's it. What seems to be the energy flowing through people, it'd be called their motivations, their needs, their desire to change, is always preceded by, predicated by, based upon, surrounded by thoughts of action. But the behavior that the thoughts speak of as being needed to be altered are not so predicated. Does anyone, besides finding that interesting, see any possibilities you could do with that once you see it? What do you ever think about this your constant behavior? Now, don't listen to the partnership and go back through, we've been through this a long time ago, and everybody knows this. After the fact, everyone believes that all these catered affairs you ordered. So if you talk to the partnership and say, why did you do that? They'll say, I'll tell you why. And you say, wait, you just did that. You don't fool me. That's some kind of just compulsive behavior. I've seen you do it. I don't mean it in the clinical sense. But that's just something you do. That's just part of your personality. It's part of your makeup. You always do that all the time. Those gestures and the way you do that, the partnership says to you, or if you're talking to somebody else, it says, you could say that, but it's not true. Because I'll tell you why I do it. Unless somebody has slipped in a kindergarten audience on me, all of you on a good day again know that's not true. All of man's affairs, all of his behavior, the affairs, they're all catered until you ask yourself or someone else, and they go, oh no, I ordered this. Whereas to use my picturization, you know by now that you didn't, not in general. You simply turn around and there it is. It's the Golden Gate Bridge done out of chopped liver. The radishes over here made up to resemble Carmen Miranda. There's wine over here. There's spilled drinks over here. Bromides over here. And you're just there. The band's over here playing, one that you like. Over here somebody else playing that you don't like the music. Some people over here are too noisy. Somebody over here, at first you think, I recognize them. Oh, that's somebody important. Do they recognize me? All of this. There you are at the banquet, and it's catered. Well, your forefathers believed that God did it. I just believe in it for the time being. It's catered, and you should know it by now. Until you turn to your own partnership or you turn to somebody else, and the question is always, good God, how did this happen? How did I end up here? And you ask the partnership there, or you ask somebody else, and they say, good question, but I'll tell you, I ordered this. Somebody asks you, how did you end up staying in this particular place with this drink in your hand, this food in your hand, you saying what you said, dressed like you're dressed, acting like you act? How did this happen? And suddenly you go, oh, good question. All right, I ordered this day before yesterday. It was about 1953. I made arrangements to get myself where I am today. I don't mind admitting it. But unless you are in a kindergarten class that slipped in here on me off of a tour bus, you know that ordinarily you have no such awareness. There are no thoughts. If there were, you would be one of the ones that could answer the question, what are you going to say next? So you've got the situation that other than the partnership answering after the fact and saying, I ordered this. I left a standing order. Maybe not every day that I pick out everything to come here, but the caterer has a standing order with me to keep food here, to keep music here, and he has a general limits, parameters, parameters for you people in other parts of the country, of how much I want to spend, you know, what class of people I'm involved with, how I'm trying to be a little upwardly mobile. But I have a standing order. This did not just happen, my friends. I am responsible in large part, and it's not true. So the situation is this, that nobody recognizes. The behavior goes on that I was calling over here, if you can read it, pure action. You operate and you do not think about it. If you still think you think about it, get back on the kindergarten bus. You do not. Not at line level consciousness. It's not required that you think about it. I've attempted and should have succeeded in even proving to you that thinking about it is the last to know. You do something and you can say, well, I plan to do it, but it physically, and even medicine is fooling around the edges of this. It's no big secret. that consciousness, your consciousness, is the last to know. Your fingers knew it before your mind did. And it gets really tricky once you begin to see it, because then you get into questions about apparently closed systems and where does any of the impetus begin. But what seems to be consciousness, that is, thinking of action, thoughts of action, compared to the action itself, is always the last to know. The action is done. The affair has been catered. It may be just that much quicker, but that much quicker will kill you. That much quicker is killing you. But the situation is this. All behavior, all ordinary behavior, would be pure action. But then the situation is this, is everyone believes that they should be changing their behavior. I should be doing things differently. And that is always preceded by, predicated upon, thoughts of action. It must be verbalized. What kind of situation do you find this to be? Using my description now. This must think certain behavior should be changed. The behavior does not think. The behavior does. That is the difference. The only two possibilities that a human has: you either act, you are acting, or you're thinking about acting. The acting does not think. It does not think about what it's doing. But then look how much of your time, you and everyone else at line level consciousness, is taken up with thoughts of action. Specifically, thoughts of changing my action. So it has to be verbalized. It's predicated upon words. It must talk about the behavior that I need to change. But note this, the very behavior that this says needs to be changed never thinks. It simply does. Does anyone either see verbally what I was about to get to, and I think I'll stop, or else can you feel the reality that we've got a situation in humanity wherein apparently all desire for change is based upon thoughts of action, and the behavior apparently to be altered, to be changed, has no such thoughts. Do I have to pull any of you Christians further to the lion's den, or even any of you Jews? You Buddhists, I'll pull you somewhere else. Does anybody see that this, if I carried it much further verbally, if you don't already feel it in yourself, that this could prove to be, I'm not going to be repetitious enough to say, again, very interesting, very peculiar. How about very purple? How about very young? How about very E-flat? Very undescribable. As coincidence would have it, someone wrote me a note here that I'm going to take it into something that I had planned to do. I'll just paraphrase some of it. They said they were reading an article having to do with some of the political activities back in the 60s here in the United States, and the article was pointing out one particular political personality at that time that apparently was a good guy, apparently was a liberal, was in favor of progressive change in the country and helping out our fellow man. And the article is now pointing out that, here it is, 15 years later, I guess, that now this guy is a pauper, he's out of the public eye, and the very kinds of people that seem to be in opposition to him are now millionaires, well-known, even the nefarious ones. well-known authors. And they say, the person says, it appears that life is rewarding and supporting the men who were the most notorious, not those who apparently were trying to do good. Then the person asked me this rhetorical question. So it seems that C, force, is not necessarily at all times the good guy in the growth of life. Here, apparently D made a bigger impact. In a sense, D was C, where this guy was supporting the apparent liberal status quo and etc. At any rate, C, they sort of asked, C is not necessarily always the good guy. All right, does everybody follow that? I have plowed up this ground many times. I'm going to try and take you off in a right-hand direction a little bit. The question is, C, or those that apparently are involved with C, constructive. From your two-dimensional viewpoint, the person who wrote the article, you at ordinary state of consciousness, apparently there's always good guys, bad guys, and people who seem to be non-involved. This kind of rhetorical question, is C always apparently the good guy? All right. Now, we've been through many times a scenario, we got principalities somewhere in the world. We've got a country that has become victim, as they see it, of an unjust peace. Some generation or generations before, there was a war, and one principality was defeated by another one and subjected to this less than judicious peace settlement. And so now a new prince arises, and he rattles his saber, and he starts talking about striking back in vengeance and take back what was ours and bring our principality back to its former deserved glory. And perhaps he does begin to wage war. If you live there and you were the ordinary part of life's body in that place, the man would be a hero to you. That's simply it. If you lived across the border in the other principality that inflicted a defeat, and now it seems as though the tables had turned and your erstwhile enemy is now over there storming through your fields again and taking back over what at one time you took from them, the man's a villain, the man's a monster. If you're away from all of it, what would it be? We've been, but this is still fairly simple. We've been through this many times. My most basic description, the poor starving man finding a billfold with lots of money in it, enough to save the farm and feed his children. What a, thank you, gods. Thank you, thank you. And off he goes. Except it's not the end of the story. Here comes another sucker 20 minutes later that lost it. And his family is just as bad. He got more kids starving. All right, it would appear to be just a matter of from what viewpoint. That is a beginning, because I have spent some amount of time trying to get you people to see. It's not that hard to see that on one example, but then to see that you can't hold that example. You cannot hold that awareness. But let's jump from, that's even still about 2.5 dimensions. Time zones. If you recall what I was talking about sometimes earlier, not the physical time zones of this planet as they're marked out in Greenwich time on the latitudes, the longitudes, but the actual time zones, as I tried to point out to you, do exist beyond that which is laid out longitudinally on this sphere. Is that there are people in life's body, groups of people and individuals, that are living in what would apparently be the present time zone of this planet. Right now, the United States, parts of Western Europe, let's say the United States is the prime example of present time. Things going about as well as they're going anywhere on this planet, to say the very least. But then you have places that are living in what would amount to draw the parallel into physical time as it's tracked now on this planet. There are people living to the west of us. There are people in a older time zone. There are people who are not up to date yet. If it's noon here, there are people still living in 11 o'clock. There are people living at 7 o'clock. The time zones also, if you recall, I pointed out, can exist in you. Like shifting plates under the crust of the planet itself is in you. They're parts of you, to put it into what seems to be human terms. Everybody at line level consciousness has attitudes, has prejudices, has beliefs, has behavior that is not even up to present time. Now you can play let's you and my father fight. Sometimes I feel this kind of prejudice towards some group of people, but damn, it was his fault. He was a damn old redneck bricklayer, and he used to badmouth people, and I don't know, I picked it up, I struggle against it, and you can talk all you want to. It's still there if you're ordinary, under certain conditions, that the molecular structure of you and your whole system reacts in a way that is almost prehistoric. Then you may have some other parts of you under the right conditions, molecularly. You might blame it on something else. You might, or when I say blame, you might attribute it to something else. That I finally did get in 2 years of junior college, and boy, what a mind blower it was. Just that little bit. And so you might express some attitudes that, if they were behavior, if it was not just thoughts about action, but anyway, just the expression through the yellow circuit might be right up to date. It could even be in a time zone east of you in Toto. That's easy enough. You can find a drunk laying out in the gutter right now that's just beat up a woman. And suddenly a minister walks by and goes, tut, tut, and the guy begins to cry and hollers, we should not mistreat our fellow man. We should not destroy ourselves physically. As far as it goes, that kind of speech, that kind of talking and thoughts of action is in a future time zone because people can't do it. He can't do it. But life makes people talk about it. Life continues to muse. Life continues just as you do, to age and to grow at different rates of speed. If we could pick out the highest point, the most furtherly east time zone in which everyone can operate just for a split second, then the whole world would drastically change. All of humanity would change. We might blow life's brains out. There might be a stroke on life if that were to happen. That is, let's assume that 99% of the world's population would say, hey, I fully believe, I can't do it all the time, but I fully believe that we should love our fellow man. That is a time zone ahead of everyone, unless you can do it, which you can't. But if we took the highest point, the most furtherly east, the most progressive time zone, and we took that one example and drug all of the rest of each person into that time zone, then you'd have, as I said, perhaps a dangerous situation in life. It does not happen. The point I was trying to get you to see is that within you, you live in different time zones. Parts of you are prehistoric. Parts of you are still medieval. And all of you should know that. And parts of you, on good days, seems to be almost floating with the gods. You can think such wonderful things until the phone rings. Until you open the icebox and there are no more Cokes. Until you stub your toe. It is literally, can be seen, I did not just make this up, although I made it up, that you're living in different time zones, but it's true in life's body also. All right, the right angle I was going to try and drag you toward is not just this 2 or 2.5 picture that I can draw, that it's all relative, whether you found the billfold or whether you lost it, whether you live in a country that's trying to regain its former glory and your leader is sent by the gods, a man to be worshipped, and right across the border, your former enemy is now being attacked. They say the man is the reincarnation of Beelzebub. He is evil incarnate. And if you were, for the time being, non-involved, you might say, are they talking about the same person? It is not simply although it's valid. That viewpoint. It also has to do with the time zones. The zone in which the operation seems to be taking place. The new leader of this country, this defeated country, under the yoke of what they consider to be an unfair peace. If you were there, the time zone would be instantaneous as to what the person was doing, what you seem to be caught up in, what seemed to be the mood of your principality, your country. It would seem to be operating at a certain kind of speed, and it would seem to be right now. If you were across the border and you continue to see your former enemies, your defeated enemies, beginning to mobilize, it seems they've caught some spirit back. Instead of being broken people, they're out marching, waving flags. This one guy seems to have risen, or this one woman seems to have caught everyone's fancy. You even hear stories that they may attack. They may come over and try to take back what you took, and maybe then some, which is, of course, that's the way those things go. You don't just take back what you took. You got to teach everybody a lesson. It would apparently, very real, be operating in a different time zone to those people. Now, since this is the area that sophisticated, educated, modern-day people, well, even before us, but would seem to be, by and large, observers. You might finally get caught up. This conflict may finally drag you into it, but for a while, you're simply an observer. You're on the other side of the planet. You're 2 or 3 principalities away. You read the news. You keep up. You know what principality the first one's doing, rearming, talking about settling old scores. You even get reports, secret reports. They're planning to invade. Then you listen to other people talk. But to you, it's operating at a different time. You're in a different time zone, not being yet involved with it. I assume this is beginning to sound verbally tricky. But what seems to be historical occurrences, whether it happened 2 years ago, 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 500 years ago. Now, an ordinary person would have a different perception, rather than me saying it's the same whether it happened 2 years ago or 500 years ago. But an ordinary person would have a different perception of how fast it happened. The further back it goes and you're further removed from it in the horizontal flow of time, and you read about it, or you hear it lectured on from some history professor, the time would seem to change then. But in your lifetime, that which you have observed, even if it was just through television and reading, things that have happened, the people involved where something is occurring, let's continue with my examples of these 2 former, or these 2 current enemies, 2 principalities side by side. One was victorious in your lifetime, and one was downtrodden, and now the defeated one is beginning to make moves. Seems to be coming back to life, and the situation may flip-flop. There's going to be trouble. Not just a relative viewpoint of saying, all right, those in the country that's now apparently becoming alive again and going to get revenge and defeat those who defeated them. It's not just that. There is a different time zone involved. Where you are, if you were involved, I hadn't forgot the question, remember, the observation the person was trying to make. The good guys seem to be operating in the present if you are there. It seems to be C, the people right across the border, a line drawn. Another group of people, a different name, Principality B people, Principality Z. And they see what's going on just across the fence, across the border there, that this bodes no good to us. The whole world is going to regret if these people get armed and start this battle all over. But the people right over there, they cannot see into a time zone wherein, if it's at the present, a good guy is the motivating force here. He turns into a non-good guy by operating in a different time zone. Is that tricky enough? Remember the person, now I'm reading about politics over the last couple of decades. So they say, it seems at times that C is not necessarily the good guy. He, the person, the theory, the group of people, the movement, is a good guy if you are living in a time zone wherein what is going on, whether it's identifiable as one person leading it or whether it's a mass movement that just seemed to spontaneously happen. If you're there and it appears to be good, it appears to be happening now, or vice versa. That which apparently is happening now is always the good guy. If you move back an inch, if you move back a second out of what seems to be the present, then that which, to one group of people, that might just be over the line, that here's the border between the two countries. Right over here, what this person is doing, what this group of people is doing, it is not in the present time. All right, now if you think I'm, which you shouldn't by now, think I'm getting political or talking about something of any importance that happened in life, look at yourself, minding your own business, trying to do good in life, trying to better yourself. I'm trying to do it right now, and then somebody makes threatening overtures. A potential foe, I'm going to have trouble here. I thought I could make this kind of move, but I see right now I'm going to have trouble with this branch of the local government, with these other business people, with my friends. Minding your own business, trying to do good in life, trying to better yourself. I'm trying to do it right now, and then somebody makes threatening overtures. A potential foe, I'm going to have trouble here. I thought I could make this kind of move, but I see right now I'm going to have trouble with this branch of the local government, with these other business people, with my friends. But it never, when you've got opposition, when apparently you now have a foe, non-good guys, whether it just be a bureaucrat about to wrap you up in red tape and to keep you from getting your business open on time. You can feel this quite real. They are not operating right now. They're not in the time zone of the present. Good guys can't exist in the past. Or those of you that still want to choke, I used to point out to you several times a year that all news is bad news. If it comes from the past, it is not good news. Now, I don't care if you're reading a history book and there's a footnote, it says, oh, by the way, it was during that summer of 1542, right after that small plague they had, that Prince so-and-so and Principality so-and-so threw one of the finest parties and dances. It lasted 2 weeks, and everybody that was there just said it was just a first-class blowout. That everybody really enjoyed it. All right, listen to you laugh. That's not history. It's almost a non-event. You read it, and what are you going to do with it? You'll never remember it. Good guys don't live in the past. It's the attempt to tell tales about good guys, prophets, religious people, sons and daughters of the gods. But look what kind of effect it has. It has quite an effect on thinking of action. But let's assume all of you grew up in the shadows of some religion, and whatever religion it was, told you all sorts of things that you should do, all sorts of ways that you should change your actions. Did it work? No, you're in the partnership. You can still think about it, but the behavior still goes on. The very things that your father's religion forbade. A person can appear, a person can appear from one time zone to be a good guy, to be operating in the employment of C. And just as real if you're in another time zone, if you're wired up, and that your view is coming from a different time zone. The same person, his same behavior, the person or persons, cannot be seen. You cannot rationalize it. You cannot stretch verbiage in such a way as to make their behavior, the actions, represent anything other than D. But you can see it as being a time zone. Is there any way that anybody could use that internally, personally? If you and the partnership were forced to come up with some description about, all right, how am I a good guy? In what way could you call me a good guy? In what kind of time zone, vis-a-vis you and the partnership talking about it, in what kind of time zone would this good guy exist? Where is he? Where is he when you need him? Where is he when he could do something? I suggest to you that most of the time you find him in your dreams. Most of the time you find him when you're impotent to act. Most of the time you find him on the basis of I should have done. When you're home, in your underwear, sitting at the kitchen table, it's 1:30 in the morning, and then you and the partnership seem to be singing the praises of this new leader, or this leader that's been around for years and he never can seem to get in power, but you're in favor of him, and how he should have handled things today when they went awry, and how tomorrow, if the same thing happened, how, by God, he could handle it. But you're dealing with a different time zone. One person's villain is just living in a different time zone to another group of people who find him to be heroic. You and the partnership, everyone's partnership, has a similar situation, that things are wired up in such a way that you, through the partnership, you and these inner voices that seem to be you, see possible aspects of you, sometimes through hero worship of others, but possible aspects of you operate in one time frame, in one time zone, and they're heroic. You thinking about it. Then you thinking about it operating in other time zones, and they're despicable. Well, I'll point out one more. How come that nobody's spiritual hero is alive? And you are really deluded to the auspices of history, which is one of life's little jokes, if you think that some of the spiritual heroes that are dead at their time were heroes. I've read a little bit. I know what history says about some of these people. That people went, yay, yay, there he comes. I hope none of you is betting any serious money on this in case you ever get to another time zone and find out what really happened. Something a little more specific, if I can make it sound more specific. I guess everyone knows the term non sequitur, which, if I recall, literally means something to the effect of it does not follow. But a non sequitur is something that seems to be a final statement, a conclusion, an observation that doesn't follow, that doesn't fit the preface to it. There's a little something that people could do that some of you have played around doing, kind of stumbled upon. Some of the tasks I've given seem to have caused some of you to go through some of this. But there is a way specifically that I was going to give you a quick description of. Once you've had a certain kind of stabilizing shift in your total organism, you can, as it were, steady yourself. And you can become more actively involved in my description of being able to hold the line, to balance the line. But then, there's a way in which you can free the yellow circuit into, it should be an area of trans sequitur. It's almost a kind of controlled in the yellow circuit. It's almost a kind of controlled insanity. I periodically, more and more, as a matter of fact, stand here on these nights that we tape these, and I throw them in. But there is a way in which you can absolutely use, it's got to be a process. You cannot just simply naturally, that is, already be wired up to be nutso. I mean, if you're wired up to operate toward life as Groucho Marx did in his heyday in the movies, then I'm afraid we don't have anything. People like that periodically do get attracted to such as this. I have to turn them away very quickly. They think they're clever. They believe, many of them, they're wired up to believe that they see the general insanity of life, and that nothing means nothing. You can't be hardwired in such a position. In a sense, you have got to be able to achieve it. And it is not, by any means, something that goes on externally that other people know about it. And it is not hostile, it is not sarcastic, it is not cynical, and therefore it can't be faked. It has to come about. But some of you have, through the own shifts in your own organisms, have begun to have this kind of experience. And so I might as well put some words on it. It's as though you can run around. I said Groucho Marx. I was trying to think of somebody that would strike all of you. Isn't just a fast example. The kind of movies he made, I assume most of you have seen. And there he is in an ordinary situation, and he continues, and he's presented as being somebody. So, a resort, and suddenly he is the new manager of the resort, and here's all these ordinary people coming through and doing things, checking into hotels, and almost everything that's said to him, he responds with a non sequitur. Puns, plays on words, just absolute non sequiturs of walking up to a strange woman and say, "We got to quit meeting like this," and walk off. That's a very crude example, but I was trying to give us a foothold for me to point you in a slightly other oblique direction. You would have to be steady enough. It would be as though you had a script by then, that you understood how things are going in life. And you would have to have a kind of steady center that you could stand there and pass for being Joe or Josephine normal. Fred and Frederica nerd. Just as square, as dense, just a living weenie. Just stand there. But you have got to have it under control. It can't be natural. That doesn't count. You know, say, it doesn't count. But if you can steady yourself and you can stay conscious in the way I was describing about being able to hold the line physically, from that place I drew that diagram across the pelvic, this triangular configuration, and you can hold yourself steady in the midst of all of this. And then it's as though you can literally turn the yellow circuit loose inside where you're looking like Mr. or Ms. Weenie Head, quite normal, and inside, in a sense, but without the hostility, without any of it, it's as though you could make Groucho Marx look like William F. Buckley. It is like being able to hurl, and then when you get good, it's just you allow it to hurl itself, that inside you're almost nutsy. This is a terrible description, especially if you and your people that will want to go, whoo, I'm sort of nuts already, and I hear what you're saying. Hell, I'm already ahead of the game. I can bypass several years. It doesn't count. Doesn't count. I mean, if you grew up thinking that you were the illegitimate son of a Stephen King or a Stan Lee, or that Alfred E. Newman was probably your twin brother, it doesn't count. You got to work your way from that into apparently being straight, boring, nerdy, dull, bland, everyday, and very steady. Very steady. Then you turn this loose, and non sequitur doesn't really cover it. As I said, a trans sequitur would be more like it. It's beyond everything that follows. It's not that what you can do with the yellow circuit internally, it's not that it doesn't follow what's going on. It follows it quite well. It can predict it. It follows it quite well, and then you can just hurl it. Or as I said, when you get good, it's like it just hurls itself, and you can let it go. And it trans sequitur. It's beyond any sense of following. And you might find the peculiar thing is that you teach yourself stuff from it. You can take just the yellow circuit in the privacy of your own head. Your entire organism, of course, is involved. But you can go into areas totally beyond normal time and ordinary spatial structures. You can put together things. I'll go ahead and say it. It's amusing, at least to you. And if you're knowing more people involved with this, if you're so inclined, you might say things periodically and they'd find it amusing. You can't, as you should know already, you can't do much with it with ordinary people. But beyond it being, in a sense, pleasurable, non-repetitious, non-boring, is you actually learn from it yourself that you are not any longer in the yellow circuit. Although here you are, and everything that shows you're apparently still in traffic, you're dressed up, at least you're dressed like everyone else, more or less. You smile when they smile. You stand when they stand. You sit. You look curious. You respond. And inside, it's almost as though Daffy Duck had become mystical, and he's bouncing off every possible word, all patterns, all sense of time that everyone else says, and you have your own running universe up here that's running parallel to this, and almost makes a non-hostile satire. Non-hostile. It's one of this can't be fate. It just happens. It's no attack on the other. When I say parallel, it's not that yours is better. It's not that everyone else are idiots. You see that you and everybody else at that level are just what they are. And yet you can turn the yellow circuit loose, and it will hurl itself into places that are absolutely beyond any sense in the ordinary world of the time zones of that which creates the appearance of good guys, bad guys, operations and actions being proper or improper, and all of the spatial structures of what am I doing here? What are these people doing here? This is not proper. This is not the way things are done. If this is the way things are done, this is the way things are done. That is the basis of a beautiful, internal, almost out of control universe. It's not only funny, pleasant, with no hostility, but you learn from it yourself. It's as though you have found some way, almost as though, hey, I've thought things I never thought about, and I learned from it. Of course, that sounds about as strange as anything. It's how can I teach myself something I don't know? Which at least I was decent enough not to present you with when we immediately started this, any of you. Because I could have been dirty enough to say, listen, I can't tell you anything. And then you're left, well, wait a minute. I know everything I know. In a sense, yeah, two-dimensionally you do. That is the sin, that is the illness of repetition. That everything is reasonable, everything is sequitur, sequitarius. Everything is logical, even if you don't like it. Everything is karmatic, if that's the word. That everything does plant its own seeds, and everybody does get it. You plant rudabakers, and by God, you're going to get them someday. Well, the few people find out that they didn't plant anything. And whatever comes up is truly kind of funny. It's just funny on a number of levels. It's funny that I can hear my own line level of consciousness, and I know what it would say about this. I know how it would say, wait a minute, let's you and whoever planted you fight. I can explain this. And laugh at everybody else's crops. Envy, well, not everybody, most people's crops, and envy some other people's crops. Internally, you can turn the yellow circuit loose, and it can go beyond all descriptions. It is a kind of controlled, don't anybody get upset by this out there, it's a kind of controlled insanity. Controlled trans sequiturs, that sounds better. Because you've got to be steady enough to do it. Not accidentally, not be wired up to be kind of weirdo in the head to start with. Part of what I have done here to some of you people is to get you unweirdoed. Some of you looked fairly all right. You were dressed up when I saw you, and you had a haircut, and your little face was washed. But some of you were just little walking Hershey bars. And now look, some of the great progress is I got you to the point that you're fairly square and normal. Find out that you're a lot more boring and predictable than you ever imagined. But that's just like kindergarten. How about this? I'm quoting some ones because I've heard this many times. I heard it fairly recently in a song on the radio, a kind of semi-humorous country folk song. The line was, it's against the law to have this much fun. Whoever wrote that particular song, it's not an absolutely original thought by any means. But when you hear it, besides the context I said that was rather funny, the full song, say, well, listen, that's against the law to have too much fun. You think, well, you could make something funny out of that. The verse could have been about everybody was in a 49 Packard and they had some of the best grass they ever had in their life and some good wine and some naked go-go dancers in the back seat. The cop pulls them over and just points out, listen, it's against the law to have too much fun. You think, yeah, that's funny, but then realize this, it is against the law to have too much fun. It is literally against the law all over life's body, that is, this little planet. It's against the law to have too much fun. Now, it's not normally couched in those words that they say that it's illegal, for instance, to be out in public and be drunk. And then they define, of course, what drunk is physiologically. Right now, we don't have prohibition of alcohol in this country. So no matter that the words by any group of people in any particular time zone, that their words may not track this, many people are wired up to say, listen, alcohol is a work of the forces. But please note, I'm not here to defend the distilled spirits industry of the world, but please note that there are large numbers of people in every time zone that's ever existed that will walk across the street for a cold beer or a martini, spend their hard-earned cash, and complain when the bars close down. They say it is fun, no matter what. Jimmy Swaggart may say, there are many people who say this is fun drinking, but it's against the law to drink too much. From other viewpoints, from other time zones, there are sexual activities, the parts of life's body, as groups of people, governments, communities, religions say, these kind of sexual activities, that is, you and one other or some other people are going to take off your clothes, and with your old damn natural bodies, you're going to do things that shouldn't be done. The people involved, they close the door, get out the Vaseline, and the bananas and everything, and they go, whee, you know, turn up the music, and got the rubber sheets, and let's have at it. They say, this is fun. If this was not fun, if my body didn't feel good in some parts, maybe in particular, I wouldn't do this. It's against the law to have too much fun. All right, some sex is all right, even from the most conservative, from time zones really to the west of wherever you are. Even the Catholics, they'll say, all right, you know, you can fuck sometimes, a man and a woman, you can do that if you're ready to have a little nipper. Yeah. So the whole world agrees that is life has told all of humanity sex is okay, the basis of it, within certain confines. But if it goes too far, by God, it's against the law. I ask you, what is life up to? Of course, you've got to be beyond the digital mind. You've got to be beyond any wired up references you have to other time zones about examples I use, alcohol and weird sex practices. Don't get entangled with any example. It's just that whatever is forbidden on this planet, only that which is desirable is forbidden. Life does not say that, hey, you shouldn't do this if nobody doesn't want to do it. The subject never comes up. It never comes up in Parliament. It never comes up in city council meetings. It never comes up at the Vatican. If nobody wants to do it, the College of Cardinals, the New York City Council, they sit around and think, how are we going to hold on to our phony baloney jobs and come up with something new to do? Hey, we'll ban something new. And they think, that's a good idea. That's always to get us in the press, and somebody will argue with us, and we'll all get to make speeches. And they think, all right, what can we do? All right, they never, just the subject never arises, they never come up with a suggestion about, hey, let's ban so-and-so, when the rest of the people say, wait a minute, nobody does that. And you go, oh, you're right. And that's then nobody don't even remember it. It's a non-event. Only that which is desirable, only that which is natural in some part, in certain time zones, in certain spatial patterns, only that which is natural, that is to some group of people at some time, only that is forbidden. Only that is subject to legislation of any kind. So to that degree, with you being able to free yourself from horizontal prejudice and hardwired opinions, whatever it is, somebody finds it to be fun. And to some degree, whatever it is, somewhere in life's body, life is allowing it. All right, you can do this. But then everywhere, there's a cutoff line wherein the cop comes up, as it were, and says, hey, it's against the law to have too much fun. What is going on? If that's a little fun, what the hell? You know, how about this much? If 6 ounces are fun, give me a half gallon. Anything that humans find fun, whether it be you or somebody in another time zone, anything that humans find fun, there's a point at which a cop, a white blood cell, a cancer cell, the threat of a cancer cell is going to come up to your car and say it's against the law to have too much fun. And everyone's wired up to go, yeah. How can a reasonable person make any sense out of this poor existence? And of course, at the binary level, you cannot. But still, the reason I bring up another one of these examples is life is up to something and no one finds it curious. If you're just living out your hardwired existence in the place in which you're plugged into life, you never question the fact that everything has a cutoff. Even things that are allowed have limits, whether they apparently are religious limits, social limits, or legislated limits. Nobody questions it. Well, listen, if that's fun, what the hell? They say, all right, it's fun, fun, fun. This is agreeable, agreeable. See paragraph B, and down there it says, unless you do it this way, and then you're subject to 5 years in jail and a $50,000 fine. If you were ordinary, if you're looking at life through ordinary eyes, then you'd say, wait a minute, somewhere the governments of the world say that we can have fun, but don't go too far because it's against the law to have too much fun. Try to get into a dimension that is the basis of all reality here. It's not simply governments, it's not legislatures or city councils or religions. It's life itself. And it has things that seem to be wired into men, kinds of energy exchanges that groups of men somewhere, and women, say this is fun. I like this, I like this, I like to do it. Every time I get a chance and I'm not too tired, I like to do that. There it is, but then somewhere life says too much of that is against the law. What is going on? How is life using such a situation as that? How are things arranged to what possible end that it appears to be that way? If there are a few things that you find fun, using you as archetypical of humanity, why should there be some limit to it? Why not say, all right, this is fun, but you can't do it in that position? No, it's against the law and/or it's against religious teachings. God said that you can do this, but not in that way. Don't you do it that way. Or we say, the government and the gods and/or the gods say, all right, you can do this thing, but don't do it over 5 minutes. You can do this thing, you can have this, but don't have over 16 ounces. All right, that is kind of fun, and it's fun with one partner, but you can't have it one. You can only do it with one person. You can only do it with one person by signing a piece of paper. If you want to do it with somebody else, come over, you're going to have to sign some more papers, and it'll take a while, and then you can do it with another person. And how old is the person? What sex is the person? What is life up to that it's against the law to have too much fun?